The way we see money is often dependent on the way we see ourselves.
This is The Payoff with me, Sylvia Jeffries, thanks to Belong Internet. Dr. Rebecca Ray, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sylvia.
We chat a lot on
do.
Today Extra about all sorts of topics. Today we want to talk about money because that's what we're all about here. We often hear people say money doesn't buy you happiness. Is that true?
Look, the research tells us that it actually does up to a certain amount, but beyond that amount, it doesn't. So it doesn't actually make too much difference. And the amount that is quoted has probably changed since I've looked at the research, but it's based on being able to meet your basic needs and also have a little bit left over for living well. So it's not that you have to be a millionaire. It's more that you don't need to go to sleep wondering where your next meal is going to come from or whether or not rent has actually been covered.
Because while, love and relationships are the things that really nurture us in so many ways and sustain us in so many ways.
Yeah.
Money can give you things that can improve your life, right? Like security, like independence,
and
like some level of freedom and spontaneity as well. And that does solve some problems.
Yeah.
How many people come to you in your profession with money worries or money stress?
It's so often sitting beside someone's anxiety as a contributor. So it's not that they'll actually make an appointment to talk about money worries. It's that when I actually drill down into what's causing the anxiety, money is sitting there up front and center, perhaps beside some relationship stress. And then you look at the fact that money worries are contributing to the relationship stress as well. So it's actually woven into the fabric of our being. The way we operate in a capitalist society is actually based on how secure we feel financially so much of the time.
I'm really interested in how our childhood relationship with money and exposure to money or not can form our approach to money later in life. You often hear stories about, a really successful footballer in the Premier League, for example, who's, a rags to riches kind of story. He's come from nothing and that gave him or her the drive to succeed in this, 1 in a million kind of role in professional sport.
Yeah.
How often does someone's relationship with money in their childhood inform their relationship with it later in life?
Oh, can I say like 98% of the time? I think it's pivotal because the way we see money is often dependent on the way we see ourselves. And the way we see ourselves is dependent on how our parents saw us or our primary caregivers saw us. So when we're raised from very little beings, our first intimate relationships are with our caregivers. And if those caregivers didn't raise us to have a stable sense of identity and to feel confident in the world in terms of our abilities and in terms of our value as human beings, then that translates into our relationship with money. Now, so often we're raised by the generations before us that bring particular ways of looking at money, like it's not polite to talk about money, or you're a woman, so you're not good with money, or you don't want to look greedy, so just be careful around that. Or it's someone else's job to take care of the finances, it's your job to take care of the kids. And then that shapes how we actually see our role in the home, in our intimate relationships, but also our sense of independence, because independence is based on, can you support yourself?
How hard can it be for people to shatter those foundations that have sort of been set for them since childhood?
Look, I'd put it up there with the worthiness wound that I think most of us carry. I'm not sure that I've ever actually met someone personally or professionally that doesn't have a worthiness wound. And I think what we get from that is we end up wanting to belong. It drives us to want to fit in, to want to be kind to others, to want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. But then what that translates to is, do I deserve? And deserve is attached to, so often in our society, because we're in Western culture, deserve is based on ourselves and it's based on money. It's attached to this particular thing that we're earning. Am I good enough for this? So it's not just about a number. It's about the am I good enough part comes down to, do I deserve? And how will I look if I step up and ask for more.
And do you notice a difference between men and women on that front?
Hugely.
How
Hugely.
so?
I think it comes down to the fact that men are socialised to step forward and to confidently own their place in the world, and that comes with expected payment in some form, or the expectation that they're valuable. And then women naturally put themselves slightly behind and give up their power to the man to be able to say, okay, it's okay for you to talk about money over there, but it's not okay for me to talk about money or even expect money. And then if I expect money, if I expect some kind of value to be attached to my performance or to be attached to my place in the world, then I should expect that to be lower. So there's usually a big gap between expectations, judgment, and the sense of confidence that people lead with depending on their gender.
So in social settings, I often observe, and other people might disagree with this, but I often observe men very casually, nonchalantly chatting about investments, for example, or finances, or what's the RBA going to do, the next time they meet, and how will that impact on your finances, etc. And it's not as often discussed in a social setting among women. I know I have a couple of friends who I talk about these things with, but it's not too often that is a common topic of conversation in a social setting for women. What do you think is behind that? What drives that?
Look, I want to say that I think it's something about social shame. I think the things that we don't talk about are the things that we attach shame to, and money is one of them. So there's fear around talking about money in case we look stupid, we don't say the right things, or we disclose how much we're being paid and it's not as good as someone else, so therefore we look like we're somehow not enough. Or it's attached to this idea that it's simply just rude to talk about it. So there's a fear of judgment, that we're somehow overstepping a line, but that line is invisible, and I think it's shifted and we haven't necessarily caught up with it.
The reality is for younger generations today is that they really have no choice but to talk about these things, right? Because young Australians right now are living under a mountain of HECS debt if they went to university. The idea of owning a home feels a bit like a fantasy in this day and age. Wages are stagnating. It feels insurmountable in 2025, this
unless you happen to be
world.
The beneficiary of some kind of generational wealth.
Exactly, which is a small percentage of young Australians. So how would you encourage young Australians to approach this conversation with their friends?
Openly.
Yeah.
Start early and start openly, because I think the more we can keep this on the table, the more it takes away the shame, and the more it also brings the fear into the light. The more we shine light on fear, the less it can grab a hold of us. And I think it's really important that we actually start looking at the fears that younger people have got, so that we can get into a place where we actually look at solutions, because otherwise if no one talks about it, then it's going to be perhaps the climate change of our generation where we don't actually start acknowledging it until it's too late. And we're at that point now with the younger generation and their finances. If we don't do something now, if they don't speak up about how scary it is to be launching into the world and not really knowing what path to take, because what path is actually going to allow them to win? Is there any such thing as winning anymore? And so instead, if they just stay quiet, what hope do they have?
What's really interesting, I think, in this conversation is that often younger people are criticised for being frivolous with money and told that, they're spending too much money on avocado toast, or they're travelling overseas too much. And I mean, there's no win, because then their parents will say, travel while you're young and see the world and, all those sorts of things. But do you think that could have a negative impact on younger generations psychologically, in terms of having or facing that criticism on a regular basis, that they are being frivolous when they really see no way forward in terms of setting themselves up long term? Yeah,
I do think that the judgment is harmful. I do think that perhaps the younger generations, though, are a little bit more discerning than perhaps we were in terms of being able to take on other people's opinions but not internalize them. So they can clap back a bit better I think. I wouldn't have clapped back the way they do now. And I really encourage them to, because I think that meshal, the emotional meshal, to say that's actually not true for us, that's not the reality that we're living, then it allows them to make choices for their own lives that at least give them quality of life. Because this is the whole thing, right? How do we live well? We've perhaps got, I don't know what happens after death, but if we only get one chance at this, then how do we do it well? And if there is the psychological stress on your shoulders every single day about how you're going to meet your bills at the end of the week, then is a chai latte actually going to harm you, or is it going to give you those tiny joys or those glimmers of hope that we actually need to hold on to?
So what if someone finds themselves really bogged down in worry?
Yeah.
Worried about their bills, worried about their debts,
Yeah.
worried about the income that isn't going anywhere,
Yeah.
and how they're going to set themselves up with any form of nest egg for retirement.
Yeah.
What can they do with that worry?
I thought you were going to say, what can they do with that nest egg?
Yeah.
I was going to go, look, wrong guest.
What would you do with that nest egg?
I do think that that's just as important, right? We need planning. And sometimes with worry, one of the best things that you can do with it is actually seek data that supports it. So if there's someone out there and they don't really know what to do with the worry around money because it's about not knowing enough about money, then sometimes simply seeking information from sources that are reputable can be really helpful, because it can actually give them a plan to move forward. So that's one thing to do, is actually go and ask a professional about it. But in terms of the psychological side of worry, I really encourage people to identify whether or not the worry has gotten big enough to push you into a paralysis, or what psychologists call a freeze response. So we often talk, and many of our listeners would have heard about the fight-flight response, which is attached to our limbic system. It's that survival instinct that means that we have this drive to act out the anxiety energy, either by fleeing or either by fighting. Most of us are designed to flee. There is a small amount of the population that have actually been trained to ignore that response by fighting. Think of military or police populations. But in terms of when it comes to money and just our younger generation kind of navigating the world, what that can end up in is actually this really subtle freeze response where they don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. And the worry then spirals out of control like a hamster on a wheel, and it means that they don't feel like they know what to do with that energy either. So they end up just overthinking, they end up spiraling into a state of fear. It can affect their sleep, it can affect their relationships, but it can stop them from actually doing something helpful with it. So we need to interrupt that freeze response so that it draws them out of that paralysis and then enables them to utilize the only thing that we can directly control, which is our actions. Now, there's so much self-help literature out there which says that you can control your thoughts and you can control your feelings.
And just be positive.
Just be positive, please. Let's just be positive.
Wouldn't that be delightful?
It's bullshit. Oh, I don't know whether I can swear.
You can say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's bullshit. Please listen when I say the clinical psychologist in the room says, please don't listen to that bit, because it's not true. So we can influence our thoughts and our feelings, but we can't directly control them. So if you understand then that your mind thinks it's got a job to do to keep you safe, and it does that by leaning into the negativity bias and trying to solve problems 100% of the time. Sometimes those problems are things that don't exist yet, like how will I buy a home in the future? Yes, the existence of the problem is real, but you're not facing it today. So what happens is we then think I should do something about those thoughts. Instead, what I'd prefer you to do is you do something about how you respond to those thoughts. So those thoughts might be there, but what you do in response to them is what counts. So probably the most effective thing that I can teach listeners without actually sitting in front of them is to understand that sometimes just getting distance from your mind is a really powerful thing to do. You can either label your mind by saying my mind is worrying right now, or my mind is having thoughts that, it's all hopeless and there's nothing that I can do that will make a difference. Or you can write the thoughts down so they get out of your head and there's somewhere for you to actually go with that energy. What that does is it contains the thoughts, and it also actually gives you a place to look at the thoughts rather than them just spiraling into a snowball in your head. Works for people like me who think in audio terms, so actually hear my own voice, and it can spiral out of control. So one sentence leads into the next sentence and then it all becomes hopeless, but it's a knot and I can't easily disentangle it. For people that think in pictures, sometimes that can be the case in that they see a stream of pictures, but some people usually find that if it's chatter, that's more easily the type of thing that spirals out of control. So get distance from your mind first, and then come back to the fact that all we can control is what we do. So instead of thinking that you should just think positive, you can't think your way out of thinking. So instead, just focus on what would be helpful right now.
So is this us finding distance from our brain?
It is, but it's also about grounding the nervous system. So sometimes if your anxiety has gotten too big around money, and let's say it's stopping you from sleeping, one of the most effective things to do is to understand that when your limbic system is taking control like that, there's no amount of logicking your way out. Logicking is not a word, but it is now. Yeah. Logicking your way out of that emotional state. So instead we need to ground the emotional state or kind of calm the nervous system so that then we can introduce logic. And you can do that by slowing your breathing down. Just breathing in for 3 seconds and out for 3 seconds for 10 breaths, because that sends messages to your nervous system that there's no need to panic, there's no need for the emergency response. Or you can focus on your senses. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you feel? What can you taste? Or you can simply allow yourself to give your brain something to do that's not related to the worrying. Think of as many animals as you can, starting with a letter of the alphabet. Sounds ridiculous, but I promise you it works. Or count backwards from 100 by sevens. It gives your mind something to do, but it's not solving the problem of the rental crisis or the cost of living crisis before you have to go to sleep tonight.
So when you found that space and you've distanced yourself from those thoughts that are spiraling, what do you do? How do you then approach that worry and, I don't know, compartmentalize it? Is that the goal?
Yeah, actually, compartmentalizing is really helpful with this, especially when it's a worry that won't necessarily go away. Because sometimes we have worries that are quite legitimate that we can't solve today. So we need to be able to find a way to live beside them, if that makes sense. So that they're going to be present, but we don't want them to actually stop you from being able to live your life today. After that point, it's really important to think about, well, what is the plan here? Can I give myself a plan to work towards? And that can be something that's guided by a financial professional or financial literacy that you've taken on as something that might be helpful for you, to then be able to go, well, here's the things that I'm working towards that are going to make my financial future more easy to navigate or more comfortable for myself, so that I'm informed and I'm taking action. Again, this is about what we do today. It's not about changing how you think or how you feel. But when you change what you do in reverse, that then has an influence over how you think and how you feel.
Sick of paying megabucks for your internet? Switching could help you. So switch to Belong Internet. They're backed by Telstra, they have a reliable network, and with internet plans with prices that aren't too spicy. Plus, you can change plans once a month and you're not locked in. For zippy internet at nifty prices, search Belong Internet. It feels good to belong. I'm a self-confessed worrywart. Anyone who knows me knows that that's who I am.
We may have had a conversation about that, about running marathons when you had a leg injury.
And guess what? I had a panic attack 1 kilometre from the finish line because I tripped over and I had to stand to the side and do my deep breaths in and out
to stop the
until my
rising.
chest released. Yeah, it was rising up. My chest was tightening. Classic kind of panic attack feelings.
Yeah.
And I thought, this isn't how this ends, 1 kilometre from the finish line. But the deep breathing got me through that.
Yeah.
Another tip that I was given from a psychologist once was to schedule time for worry. So schedule in 20 minutes during a period of high stress or worry or whatever's going on in your life, and write down those things that are worrying you and try to dissect them into things that are present and things that are not present right away. Is that something that you advise?
Yes, but in conjunction with the writing down. So I really like that part. My concern about just giving yourself 20 minutes to worry and not doing the writing down is that it's so easy for that to spiral in your head. So in that in the entanglement thing that I was talking about earlier, in terms of the snowball, we don't want that to get out of control. When you stop and you write something down, what it does is it actually slows down your thinking to the speed of your handwriting. And I don't know about you, but I type faster than I write. So when I actually have to handwrite, not only is my handwriting disgusting because I'm losing that skill. Yeah.
University killed mine.
Right?
Yeah.
But it means that what we actually get is we get this transformation of blood flow in the brain. So when you've got anxiety, and especially if you're on the edge of panicking, what's happening is the blood flow is flooding the limbic system, which is the fear system in your brain. It is the part of your brain that says we are in panic mode and we need to run right now because there is a saber-toothed tiger chasing us. I mean, obviously that's not the case, but in 2025, what happens with our mind is still the same DNA works, right? So this survival mechanism is still operating. Think of it like we're working with really old software that hasn't been updated for millennia. So in that way, what happens is when we actually get you to write down your worries, we're pushing blood flow to the left side of the brain, the left prefrontal cortex to be specific. And that's the part of the brain that actually controls logical, rational thinking. It also does planning and decision making. And so what we're doing is we're bringing that online. Think of it as going offline while you're panicking, and then we're bringing it back online when you handwrite your thoughts down and you give yourself that time to focus on it. Now, the other thing that your psychologist asked you to do is to think about what is an actual worry right now and what's not relevant right now. So you can actually delay it or delay worrying about it, I guess. One of the things that happens with anxiety so often is it's based on something that's anticipated, not something that's actually happening in the here and now. And so it's almost like we spend energy panicking about a future emergency situation that may never occur. Now, in some ways, you can think in terms of, well, aren't I planning for the worst? So therefore, if we enjoy best case scenario, it's just a bonus. I mean, yeah, but if you're doing that all the time, then you're wasting energy that you might otherwise use on just directing your actions towards values-directed living.
I feel like I should be reclining. I'm just asking you questions for my own mental health.
Absolutely. This is Sylvia's therapy
This is what we do in the ad breaks in between every Today Extra segment. Excuse me, I'll just clear my throat. Okay, the other thing I really want to talk to you about is money in a relationship.
Yeah.
Especially early stages of a relationship when you're really setting the foundations with a partner. How soon is too soon to start talking finances with a partner?
Oh, date 2. I mean, I would say as soon as you decide to solidify a relationship, so once we're a thing, I would want to be knowing what are our views on money here. Because it's like the idea of having children. If you're not compatible, if you don't have the same ideas around something as big as money, then that can be a deal breaker from the get-go. So it's not too soon to be communicating about money from a place of openness and vulnerability. I'm not saying that you go after someone because he doesn't buy you flowers or he doesn't pay or, those types of values. I mean, sure, if they're your values, then it might be important to you. But what I'm talking about is general attitudes towards money in terms of who's got these roles for earning and how is that going to be balanced in your relationship? Is there going to be a balance between independence and earning between both of you? Or is one person going to take a more traditional caregiving role and the other person take a kind of the financial leader role? I mean, I don't know how often that actually happens now or can happen in today's day and age, but it's still a thing, especially because we have also done a segment on Today Extra about trad wives, right? Where that is a really big thing and we have one income households. So if you don't start talking about those things at the beginning, then my concern would be, are you being authentic? Have you expressed yourself enough so that when it comes up, you each know where the other person stands?
So what do we need to ask about? Do we need to ask someone on the third date how much debt they have? Or how much savings do they have, perhaps?
I would say once it's defined as a relationship, yeah.
Straight in.
Yeah.
In for the kill.
Absolutely. Because this also comes down to openness. If we're not sharing these things, then A, what are you hiding and why? And B, are we introducing a need for shame in the relationship or that only one person is allowed to talk about money or allowed to share those things, but the other person doesn't have to talk about it because they're a particular gender or because they have particular beliefs around it? I think if you start with a blank canvas and there's there's an approach from a place of we're in this together, facing money together and building our lives together, you can't go wrong with talking about those things.
What if you're deep into a relationship, you're a few years in, and maybe at the point of thinking about either marriage or a house together, or talking about babies, any of those sort of milestones in your life, and you realise a few years in that you're on a very different page to your partner. Is that a deal breaker, or is there a way to get around that?
I think as long as we lead with love, there's a way. I like to hope there's a way. I mean, sometimes you might find things out about your partner's financial behaviour that could be a deal breaker. I've treated not many a client, but quite a few clients who have discovered something about their partner's financial behaviour that has been deal breakers. But I've also treated people who have stayed in the relationship and restored their sense of trust in the relationship. So it's almost like, think of it like financial infidelity. One client in particular had a partner who spent $50,000 on a hobby and the partner didn't know about it. And that's a significant amount of money to be spending on just a hobby. It wasn't on investing in anything like that. It was simply just a hobby. So that the partner didn't share either. So it's not like it was this kind of communal spending. And the shock of that has all the same factors associated with it as infidelity, emotional and sexual infidelity. So it can have these really huge impacts on how we see ourselves in the relationship. And trust is such a huge foundation of intimate relationships that if you then find out that your value system financially is different to your partner's value system, you can start to doubt everything that you're moving towards together. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it means that we can be in a position where we start to think about how do we come back around together to be on the same team with this. Sometimes when you find out someone's values, it's simply just a place for you to get curious and go, okay, how do we diverge here? Or how did I not know this about you? And what does it mean for our future? Sometimes it will mean that you're better off going separate ways, especially if this means that you can't envisage sharing huge financial, I was going to say burdens. Commitments is better. Children aren't burdens, but commitments, right?
Yeah. They take a lot of our money.
Yes, they do. They do. They're an expensive commitment. But so is a house, so is just sharing the cost of living expenses. So if you don't think that you can do that from the same emotional place, if it's going to cause this kind of escalation between the two of you, or a sign that you can't trust your partner to come to a place of balance or rhythm between you, then it might be a sign that you need to go your separate ways.
So I imagine language is really important if you get to a
as
point
with any
like
boundaries.
This. Exactly. Yeah. So if you discover that you are not aligned on something really important financially, or you've discovered that your partner is sinking money into something that they haven't told you about, how do you approach that conversation, especially if you're trying to salvage the relationship and you don't want to cast judgment? How do you approach that conversation?
You're so diplomatic. I love it. I just want like a little Sylvia sitting beside me when I explain really emotional concepts. Because
I don't know that you want me beside you for that. No.
Access to the worry part we can deal with. But I will take the diplomacy any day. I think to always lead with curiosity rather than judgment, that's a great thing. But the first thing I would say is that you're really important to me. And this and our relationship is really important to me. And so I want to make sure that we're on the same side here. And this information has come to light, and it feels like that doesn't fit with what I knew about us as a couple and where we're headed. So is there a way that we can look at this? Because I want to understand where I fit. I want to understand where you fit and how you see our future and how I see our future. Well, can we have a conversation about that?
That's so good.
It's just gentle, right? Like, I think, especially on social media, where we've been socialized to just look at 15-second clips, and the more views you get, is based on how shocking something is.
Everything has to be big and outrageous.
Big and outrageous, exactly. We can think that we've got to be big and outrageous with our emotional affairs. And money is so often an emotional affair that you lead into your relationship, and you're going for the jugular at the get-go. I mean, if this is someone that you love, that's probably not going to be the best way if you want to preserve the relationship. But also, I'll be the first to say that sometimes when trust is broken to such a level, you don't have an obligation to stay in the relationship. You can independently withdraw yourself from that relationship and act from a place of self-protection. That's fine. But if you want the relationship to continue, it's always better to consider how you're treating someone while you discuss sensitive issues. But that's also why I think talking about money really early is so important. So it's not just something that's sensitive, because that means that you're less likely to talk about it often. You're less likely to set boundaries around it that are important to you. And you're less likely to be able to talk about it on a regular basis that allows you to keep planning.
So you mentioned social media. On that, and also the shame that you discussed earlier, how much is social media feeding that concept of shame, or that feeling of shame that a lot of people might hold about their finances?
Comparison. That's not an answer, but that's what it makes me think. Yeah, I think what we get fed is this idea that there is a way to have it all. Maybe there is. I haven't discovered it yet. But essentially we're sold this idea that there are people out there that are living these fantastical lives, making all this money, living in a way that we could only dream of, and we're doing something wrong, or we hold some kind of character flaw, which means we're not doing the same thing. So therefore, our relationship with money and the amount of money that we have is somehow shameful.
How are we breaking that shame? You know, let's say someone with a 10 grand credit card debt because they can't keep up with their bills, and they wanted to buy that one jacket that they really liked this season, or the dog got sick or the registration arrived at the same time, and they've sort of accidentally and all of a sudden built up this debt that they don't feel like they're going to be able to get on top of anytime soon. How can they approach the shame that they feel about that, if that's what they feel about it?
Shame lives in the dark. So the more you actually allow it to go unspoken, the stronger it will get, the more intense it will get. So the most important thing is to say it out loud, but do not say it to someone that is psychologically unsafe for you. So I think this is really key. You know how you said that you had a couple of girlfriends that you talk about money with, but it's only a couple, right? I'm betting it's because those women, I'm assuming they're women. I just call them girlfriends.
They are my girlfriends,
yeah. So I'm assuming that you can have those conversations because they're psychologically safe for you. That means that you can talk without fear of being humiliated or embarrassed or judged or being shamed about something, or therefore having what you say held against you and come out in some kind of punishment, like, you know, friendship jealousy or something like that. It's really important that if you feel shameful around money, you find people that you trust and you find people that you don't feel judge you, so that you can have those conversations. Because the minute you start talking about it and realize that A, you're not alone, there is so many other people out there in the same boat, and B, there are strategies to work your way out of it, then all of a sudden it becomes a problem that you're facing rather than a problem that you are.
Self-compassion is really the theme of a lot of what you're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah. I know. I am a broken record because I'm always coming back to the fact that the way we hold ourselves or the way that we see ourselves usually dictates how we move through our own lives. And this isn't just about money. It's about everything. It's about relationships. It's about body image. It's about how we show up for our people. But it's ultimately about how we show up for our younger selves. And money is often about how your adult people were for you as a child that shaped you. And now how you see yourself is often that criticism applied to a younger you that still lives inside.
Oh, that's some deep stuff.
It is.
So let's put the be positive BS to the side. And what is one small mindset tip that you could give to anyone listening to this to improve their own relationship with money?
Yeah. I want you to think about money as a source of independence and freedom. Not anything that's attached to what you deserve, whether or not you're greedy, whether or not you're successful, which is also another really loaded word in our society. Instead, think of it as a tool. It's not something that defines you. It's not something that you internalize as a character feature. Instead, it's something that you have access to that you can use in a certain way. So then, if you're operating from that place, it's just a thing. It's not who you are.
Why should young Aussies in 2025, young adults, feel positive or feel confident or hopeful?
Hopeful.
About their futures.
About
their future.
The positive word is loaded for me simply because of self-help, but I love confident and hopeful because I think if we don't have hope, we don't have much. So I think it's to understand that even if you're young, the generations before you actually care about you. You may not hear that point of view on social media because you hear the very outrageous point of view that says that, I don't know, some boomer makes some statement about how you should just go and save up for a deposit at 19. Most of us really care about how you're doing. We want you to do well and we want to be able to help where we can. So I don't want young people to actually feel alone because they're not. We're doing this. We're having this conversation because it matters, because they matter, because we're not just going to leave them cast aside. We're in this together.
You're so good. Always so good. It's so nice to chat for more than 5 minutes
for
once too.
It feels very indulgent. I love it.
It is. I love it. Thank you, Beck, for joining us.
Thanks for having
me.
me.
Appreciate it.